Hello, my fellow life explorers. Today I'm going to talk about education, and I'll start with this. What if I told you you are not educated? Well, that's a very controversial thing to say. You would come back to me by saying that I am. I went to school, I went to college, I have degrees. How can you say that I'm not educated? Okay, I'll rephrase the sentence. Let me say that you're not completely educated. That's interesting. You must be thinking, what is he talking about? The idea of education that we have in our minds in the modern world is very limiting. And that's the concept I've struggled with for many years. I too have degrees, I too work, but I don't consider myself educated at all. Because the only education that we receive in our lives is the education of bread. No matter what you become, an engineer, a plumber, a clerk, a doctor, a bank teller, it helps you in earning a livelihood, but it does not make you understand life at all. If I boil it down, the only skill that we learn through any discipline in our lives is how to earn bread and make money for survival and comfort. However, what fascinates me is this. As human beings, we are the most intelligent and sentient species in the entire observable universe. And the only thing we know is how to earn bread and make money. No matter what you do or no matter what you know, no matter what your discipline is, that is what most of us are doing. Again, as a sentient and intelligent being, that sounds very limiting. Should I not be knowing a little more about how this works? A little bit about my mind? And a little bit about the existence. So here's what I'm telling you. And here is what I mean by not being completely educated. My education is only 1/3. And let's explore what could be the rest of the 2/3 of the education that I'm talking about. Which, according to my research and reading, would make up for an entire holistic education or an education system. Apart from the education of earning bread, the next third of the education should be understanding your own body, of how this works. Right now, most people, and I'm not talking about all the people, I'm just talking about most people, have no clue about the mechanisms and nuances of how this body works, how this body operates. The first thing that comes to our minds when we find ourselves in bodily or physical distress is to look for a doctor. It is not a bad thing to look for a doctor, but tell me this, as a sentient life, as a sentient being, should I not be a little more aware about my own bodily working and know what's going on before I go and see a doctor or consult him? I mean, in this respect, animals are better than us. There are no doctors in the jungles, and I'm sure they get injured or sick all the time. All the lions, the gorillas, the chimps, the wolves, the tigers, the leopards, the rhinos, and they still survive without doctors. How's that possible? If you research ancient medicinal systems like Ayurveda, yoga falls under Ayurveda, acupressure, acupuncture, you will realize that they teach the language of your body, and they all work under one principle, that your body wants to get better. Because a healthy body is in coherence with life. And as long as you live, your body wants to be in coherence with life. If you look at it closely, a doctor doesn't really cure you. Basically, you cure yourself. Now, if you have pain because of something that's going on in your body, a doctor will give you a painkiller. The painkiller will take your mind off the thing that's going on in your body. And when your mind is off that thing, the body has time and the body starts utilizing the resources in order to fix that issue. Now, because you're no longer interfering with that issue, the body will fix it. It's exactly like when you take your car to a mechanic. The mechanic does not want to be bothered by you. He wants to work on his shit. Now, coming back to the doctors, the whole Western medicinal system or the allopathic medicinal system is hit and trial. If you go to a doctor, the doctor would look at your symptoms and prescribe you medicine according to those symptoms. Symptoms that the doctor read in a book. This body is so complicated. There are so many things going on that not everything can be put in a book. Not every individual, not every human being is built the same. If you look at Ayurveda, it tells you that there are 3 types of bodies and there are combinations of them as well. It is very complicated. And we will talk about that later in some other video. But right now, the doctors, most of the doctors, again, I'm talking about most of the doctors, pardon my French, are chemical peddlers to big pharmas. They prescribe you medicine based on your symptoms that they read in a book. So as soon as you go to a doctor, he'll look at your symptoms, prescribe you medicines, and quickly send you on your way so that you can make way for the next patient, so he can maximally optimize his time to gain maximum profit in order to make a good living. And it's not the doctor's fault, because that's the kind of education the doctor received. Now, am I saying that we don't need doctors? Of course, I'm not saying that. Okay, I'm not here to diss doctors, or I'm not here to diss the medicinal system. But don't you think that as an intelligent and sentient species, individually, you will have your best interest at heart more than anyone in this world? Let me tell you a story. My great-grandfather was a Vaidya. He was a practitioner of Ayurvedic medicine. I mean, that's how I can put it in English, because it was way more complicated, and he used to read ancient Ayurvedic texts in original Sanskrit, which is way too of a complicated language than English. My father used to tell me that 99% of the time, he used to diagnose and remedy patients just by putting his hand on their nerves and telling them what's wrong with them. My father remembers him curing a person with cerebral palsy. If you go and look at Google, do we have a cure for cerebral palsy now in this modern, technologically advanced world? You will find no. And why he brought that up? Because I had a brother who had cerebral palsy, and we could never find a cure for him. He died at a very young age. And my father always used to wonder that if his grandfather or my great-grandfather was alive, he would have cured my brother. And that is such an unfortunate thing, to be living in this advanced world and not be having a cure for something like cerebral palsy. I used to ask my father, because I was fascinated, I used to ask my father that he must have been a very rich person based on his skill set. And surprisingly, that wasn't the case. He lived a very ordinary life during the British Empire. Of course, he was compensated by grateful patients. He never asked for anything. But the patients in those times were so grateful that they used to come to him with grains, vegetables, groceries, and other things of utilities. Now, how can a man of his talents lead such an ordinary life? Because he was not in it for the money or profit. He was an absolute scientist who was in it for the science, like Einstein or Newton. Now, the last sort of the education that I would say is self-awareness and a man's exploration into his own being. Something that we dismiss blatantly by calling it philosophical or spiritual and not being related to real life. And yet we find ourselves struggling with our own minds and our own thoughts, and at the doorsteps of mental health practitioners who actually study these so-called philosophical Freuds and Jungs to prepare for their profession. I'll talk about the mind and mental health in some other video later at some point. Now, all these practitioners are doing this for bread, and you will never be their primary goal. They will help you manage everything. That's why therapy works. But it works as long as you go to therapy. So the last third of the education should be concerned with life, death, inner explorations, and secrets of life. Just like a sex ed class in school, we should have a life ed class. Or with people who have a little more tolerance for more darker and gory things, a death ed class. Now, this is what I think about education on a complete level. That everyone should be trained about these things. And that's how we become completely educated. If we do not do that, the technology that we have in the world today is already distancing us from our own beings at a very, very rapid rate. That is the only thing that will become detrimental for us.